meeting for St. Tammany Parish School Board Committee as a whole, Human Resources and Education meeting for Thursday, September the 5th, 2019 has begun. Ms. Coulter, would you call the roll, please, ma'am?
Mr. Green? Here. Mrs. Heinz? Here. Mr. Derman? Here. Mr. Loop? Here. Mr. Harrell? Mr. Nation?
Here.
Mrs. Richardson?
Here.
Mr. Winkler?
Here.
Mrs. Drucker? Mr. Bentoncourt? Mrs. Lamy?
Here.
Mr. Hersey?
Here.
Mr. Bro?
Here.
Mr. Kuzan?
Here.
Mrs. Page?
Thank you. Would everyone please stand for our invocation and pledge, which is led by Mr. Nations?
Let us pray. Direct us, O Lord, with your most gracious favor, that all our work, begun, continued, and ended in you, may find favor in your sight. And finally, by your mercy, may we obtain everlasting life through Christ our Lord. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We now move to recognition of visitors. Do any board members have any visitors they'd like to recognize? Seeing none, we move on to public comments. Before we start public comments, I'd like to ask that the people making the comments, please state your name for the record and please adhere to the time limit. We'd like to begin with Mr. Tim Lights, our 5 minutes, the candidate for St. Tammany Parish Sheriff. Mr. Lights? Lentz, I'm sorry.
Lentz. I can't say that's not the first time that's ever happened. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Tim Lentz. I'm a candidate for sheriff here in St. Tammany Parish. Thank you, Kev. Your timekeeper. That's the best job they could find for you. I want to tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm qualified to be your next sheriff here in St. Tammany. Grew up in Mandeville. I'm a graduate of Mandeville High School, one of your wonderful public school systems. And growing up in Mandeville, there was a young Mandeville police officer who I developed a friendship with, who was about 10 years older than I was, and would come around the house with his police car and let me play with his red lights and siren, and was just enamored about the idea of being a policeman. And when I graduated from Mandeville High School, I went to Southeastern studying criminal justice, and that young policeman was Tom Buell, who went on to be a mentor of mine, and I still miss today, a first-class man. So at Southeastern studying criminal justice, someone told me before you make this lifelong commitment, you ought to volunteer your time somewhere. And I joined the reserves at the sheriff's office at the age of 19. Fell in love with it. Our number one call back then was open range, cattle running loose. Between Mandeville and Covington on 190 was Jim's Chicken Town and Pretty Acres Golf Course, and that was it. And fell in love with being a policeman, serving this community. And put my application to go full-time, thinking they never hired me. I just was 20 years old. Pat Kenulette, the sheriff at that time, sure enough hired me. And I dropped out of college at that time and went to work full-time at the age of 20. My mom had to buy my gun and my bulletproof vest for me. I wasn't old enough to carry it, but I could wear it and use it. Proceeded through my career, worked every division you can think of, from patrol investigations, worked Dixie Mafia murders, aggravated rape cases, to simple bicycle thefts. Commanded our crime lab, our narcotics division, investigations division, worked my way into the administration, became the deputy chief, and then eventually chief deputy, number 2 in command of, at that time, a 750-man agency. And our pensions rules had changed a while back, and once you got your 30 years in, you retire without any penalties. Well, as I mentioned, I started when I was 20. When I hit my 30, I was 50, and I retired. One of the best experiences of my life, working at that sheriff's office. Along the way, I went to night school, got my undergraduate degree in criminal justice, went back to grad school, got my master's degree in criminal justice, and became an adjunct professor. But being 50, young, my foot was still on the gas. I put my application in to be chief of police here in the city of Covington. And for those of you that followed the history of this department, to say it was broken was an understatement. Police officers were getting arrested. Referees were getting arrested at football games. It was a mess. And we went in and immediately started rebuilding that police department with a simple philosophy: care, compassion, and discretion, putting it back in our police officers' hands. We went from making national news for bad things to making national news for good things. Won every award you can possibly imagine, and gained recognition that I am still proud of today. For a 40-man police department, when I took over, they had a full-time internal affairs division handling all the complaints against the police officers. And when I left, in my 5 years, we did not have a single use of force complaint on any officer. But the highlight of my time at the city of Covington was a program called Operation Angel. Our community, much like every other community in America, suffers from the opioid crisis. Last year in St. Tammany, we lost over 80 people to drug overdoses here in St. Tammany Parish. And a 911 call that my department received, actually 3 blocks from here, across from William Pitcher, a gentleman's overdosing on heroin, and his wife's called up. But what really shook me about the entire call was in the background you could hear the kids crying. And our philosophy at that time, he survives, a police officer places on arrest, placed his wife under arrest, called Child Protective Services, and had their kids taken away from him. And I asked myself at the end of the day, what did we accomplish? These people are sick. And I brought a model program to St. Tammany called Operation Angel, to where if you're suffering from an addiction, any addiction, you can walk in my law enforcement agency, say, I need help, and we find you treatment versus putting you in jail. Overwhelmingly successful. In the first year, over 100 people walked in. That's 100 people you and I as taxpayers didn't have to pay for their incarceration, their treatment while in jail, and they got a second chance at life. If someone's asked me what's going to be my legacy, it will be that. But it's those programs, that care, compassion, that I want to take to the next level as your sheriff. We're all in a relationship business, no matter what your profession is. And I'm proud to have an excellent relationship with your superintendent and many of your school board members. Wholeheartedly support your school resource officer program. But what I think is even more important is the mental health providers you put in the school. But it can't stop there. There's more work that we can do. When we form those partnerships and relationships, we can take it to the next level to ensure our school's safety and our kids' safety. Again, my name is Tim Lentz. I'm running for sheriff here in St. Tammany Parish. I truly appreciate your time, but I also appreciate your public service. It's not easy to be up there today in today's world. Trust me, I know. I've been there. So God bless you for what you do, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn.
Mr.
Next.
Kuzan, if I may. Tim, I just wanted to thank you for all the efforts that you made whenever we were putting our resource officers in our schools here in the city of Covington, and that was under your jurisdiction. And it was, a time element that it required, and we, as a school system and as a school board member and as a parent, certainly we appreciate your efforts wholeheartedly to get this done. It was quite an accomplishment, and again, we appreciate working with you. Thank you.
Finish? Any other board member? Okay, at this time, Mrs. Sherry Cotera, is she here? Did she make it?
She made it.
Okay, Sherry, would you come up, please?
Saw that new work on Highway 190, let you get down the highway real quick and make it here on time.
You know me, sir. Greetings. How are you all doing? Thank you for allowing me this time to speak. Yes, I did hurry up to get here, and was texting Mr. Jaffee on the way. It's like, please. So I come here tonight to speak with you all about something much different than I normally do, and it's about ABA therapy. Normally, someone else would come here before you all to speak about it, but I was approached to use my voice to speak about this. And of course, I had to reach out to people to educate myself on what this was and why it was so important, and find out exactly what I needed to know about this. So what I found out is there is a law regarding ABA therapy, and that all schools are all districts are supposed to allow it in the school systems. Then there was a clarification on that law called 116, I believe it was, that kind of clarified things. So after I got that definition out of the way, I decided to reach out to providers and parents and teachers alike. And in the process of gathering all of this information, what the one word that I heard most prominently and was progress. It was progression of the children that would receive these therapies, be it outside of the school, but most importantly, in the school. So basically what this service is it's supposed to act along with what you all provide to our students, and to correct behaviors so that when a teacher is teaching, say the ABA therapist is in the classroom and a child's behaviors would accelerate. Instead of that teacher having to take time and correct that behavior, that therapist would correct that behavior. And guess who wins? Everyone. The teacher wins. The child with the behavior wins. And so does the rest of the class, because that teacher's instruction time has not been interrupted, not only for the child with the behavior, but the entire classroom. And I say this because this is what I heard from educators. This is what teachers told me is their opinion on ABA therapy. So I reached out to providers and what they would do if they were allowed into our school system. And they kind of agreed with everyone is that is what their role is, to make sure that when these children have their behaviors, or an acceleration of behaviors is what I'll call it. It's probably not the proper verbiage, but I'm not politically correct, so this is how I say it. An acceleration of behaviors, this therapist would redirect that child. So again, the instruction of the classroom would go. So this is what I don't understand. With there being a law in place and a clarification on that law, I was told also that when Ms. Bowers was asked about the time frame of how long it would take, and if I'm wrong, please correct me and educate me on that, that it would be like a 2-week process. But here we are, some like 2 years after the first law was put into place, and we still are not getting ABA therapy in our schools. We claim to be the #1 school system in Louisiana, and I believe that. My own children are a product of this school system and are continuing on to higher education in St. Tammany Parish. So what is the problem? What is the holdup? Why are we not following the law in this parish, allowing this essential service to our children, which are not going to only help the children with the behaviors, but it's going to help other children? Why are we not doing that? And while I'm at it, you know, I know our schools are very high rated in this parish, and there's a reason, because everybody works very hard together as a team in this parish to make sure our children are educated well. And so wouldn't that bring up even more the ratings of our schools if all of our children were given a chance to be equally educated according to their needs, as the ADA law says that they're supposed to be? So these are things I would like you all to consider. And I would like to thank you for giving me the time to speak about this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Capone. This time, we'd like to have Mrs. Lee Barrios.
Good evening, I'm Lee Barrios, a retired teacher from St. Tammany. The issue I want to discuss tonight is the mandate by Bessie to follow a policy designed by our state superintendent, John White, and made an essential part of this state's Every Student Succeeds plan, submitted to the U.S. Department of Ed as a requirement to receive certain federal funding. It should be noted that when that plan was being written and when it was finally going to be submitted by the Superintendent White, the State Superintendents Association, the State Principals Association, the Louisiana School Boards Association, and teachers represented by both unions objected to a number of things in that plan, but the state superintendent sent it anyway. I want everyone to understand first that the mandates Bessie has pushed down to the district level are not requirements that the federal government made, but are in fact a plan created by Superintendent White and simply approved by the U.S. Department of Education. It's a fur piece between Louisiana and Washington, D.C. The mandate I'm specifically addressing tonight is a requirement by Bessie to use the Eureka Math and Core Knowledge English Language Arts curriculums in every school designated by the state as in need of intervention. That designation itself is a false machination created by State Superintendent White. To ensure the accomplishment of this curriculum mandate, Superintendent White and Bessie have told districts that if they don't use these two curriculums, they will not be eligible for the federal ESSA funds designated for schools and intervention, which are provided to the state for distribution at the will of Superintendent White and Bessie to the local districts. I also want the public to understand that, number one, ESSA requires the curriculums used as part of these interventions be evidence-based, research-backed curriculum. Neither Eureka nor Core Knowledge qualify. Superintendent White has called these curriculums Tier 1 quality curriculum. ESSA calls their evidence-based, research-backed curriculum options Tier 1. Superintendent White has apparently pulled the wool over the eyes of the U.S. Department of Ed by referring to his curriculum choices as Tier 1 curriculum. I might also add that this curriculum mandate by the state is prohibited by state law, which gives districts full authority to carry out their own curriculum and textbook selections through a state-approved process. But the threat of having federal funding withheld and the fact that the state controls the creation of the LEAP assessments based on these curriculums has coerced districts into compliance. The level of interference by Bessie, the manipulation of test scores and school performance scores, the adoption of a terrible set of standards called the Common Core, and various and sundry other bureaucratic mandates has made it essential for everyone who wants to return local control to the taxpayers of our districts and to salvage what is left of our public school systems, so important to the futures of our children and our community, to get out and vote on October 12th, and to vote for the only candidate who will expose these policies for what they are and will have no hesitation in making a motion to appoint a new superintendent and send the current one packing. That candidate is, guess who? Me, Lee Berrios. I'm your only option considering the incumbent. I have worked diligently for the past 9 years since my retirement in support of public education. This is my third attempt to win this seat, held for the last 12 years by the incumbent, the attorney James Garvey. I encourage everyone to visit my Facebook page, Elect Lee Berrios, my blog at goteacher.net, and to share my pages and my positions on education, and also it would be a great help to contribute to my campaign. Thank you.
We'd like to move now to 3 minutes. People have signed up for 3 minutes. First one is Mrs. Annie McWhorter. Now, please remember to state your name and adhere to the time limit, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andella McWhorter. I own a national sensory therapy materials company and design sensory therapy materials for autism around the world. I'm also a registered lobbyist. For my purposes here tonight, more importantly, I am a mother. My son attends St. Tammany Parish Public Schools, and we're very proud to have him here. We were instrumental in the passage of Act 117. The reason that we were so far behind that bill is trying to get the ABA therapists into the school system to also help with the bullying problem. As my son testified at the Louisiana House of Representatives, we had some instances happen where therapeutic intervention would have been beneficial. Now, we have had the benefit of this week seeing St. Tammany take on restorative processes. And I wanted to say thank you for the movement that we're seeing and away from criminalizing these children's behaviors and more towards trying to get them the interventions that we are required to by law. What I would like to see happen is for the children to get the help that they need, but at the same time, every child has to be safe. My son's been thrown against a fence. He also had his head slammed on a bus. We want to see every intervention come to play within the parish so that our children can be successful. These children are going to need some one-on-one behavior support and whatever that we can give them. So thank you for hearing about ABA therapy today. Thank you for hearing about it last session and 2 years previously.
Thank you. And Mr. Robert Broom, Mr. Broom.
Good evening. My name is Robert Broom, and I am from Slidell. I wish to comment on the proposed position description for internal auditor that's coming up at this meeting. First, let me say that I consider everyone in this room to be my friend, and I apologize to anyone who might be upset by my comments. I have not discussed this issue with anyone. Everything I say is my own conclusion based solely on the wording of the position description. I support the internal auditor position and many of the tasks listed in the PD. I have distributed copies of my comments to all the board members. Given my limited time, I plan to give myself a soccer red card when I describe a ridiculous conclusion reached by reading this PD. And that is my point. The PD should never lead to a ridiculous conclusion. So I'm going to go quickly through the PD. There's copies available. I'm sure it was distributed. So I'm just going to go through. Function 1, this talks about the shared responsibility for the financial operation of the school system. This seems like a tall order for someone with 3 years of experience. The statement would be misleading to many new hires. Function 1A. This sounds like the internal auditor will develop their own goals and objectives for all their assignments. Recommendation to their supervisor seems like a clearer description. Function 1B. Allowing the employee to develop their own personal goals and objectives without supervisor approval is unusual, but this is what the function says. So function 2, I personally find the use of the word challenges here to be unwise. But if the function of the internal auditor is to be adversarial, then okay. But reviews or evaluates might be a better choice of words. Function 2D, this is the most surprising job function. Here, the IA will be responsible for auditing all payroll personnel-related matters. I can't imagine anyone accomplishing that workload. And why is the internal auditor involved in auditing, say, the personnel implementation of new labor laws? On the face of it, that is a ridiculous interpretation. And in their spare time, they'll also audit all payroll-related matters. The PD should focus on auditing financial procedures and practices. Function 4, no. The board and the superintendent initiate policies, practices, and procedures. The staff recommends and implements, but they do not initiate procedures. Thank you. I did the best I could with the time I had.
Thank you, Mr. Broom. We move on to item 3, which is approval for the minutes of committee as a whole meeting held on August the 1st, 2019. Do I have a motion? Moved by Mr. Beckencourt. Second by Mr. Hersey. Any questions from the board? Any comments from the public? Everyone, please vote.
Thirteen days.
15 yeas, 13 yeas. Two nays?
Unanimous.
13 yeas, no abstention. Motion passes. Okay. Move on to item 4, human resources. Mr. Javier? I'm sorry. Human Resources.
I'm sorry, I guess Ms. Hines and Ms. Richardson is introducing that.
Okay, Ms. Hines?
Thank you, Mr. Kuzan. I appreciate it. I'd like to just make a few brief comments before I ask Ms. Richardson to chime in on our internal auditor position. You know, this is a vacancy that was created a while back, and it's time to fill that position. But I wanted to give you a little bit of history with it. You know, Ms. Prevost and her staff do an excellent job on an ongoing basis reviewing our policies and procedures that we use, and they make recommendations when we have when they find things that they feel like we need to rectify, and we appreciate that with them. I also would like to point out that this isn't a position that we're required to have an internal auditor, but Mr. Foles brought it up a couple of years ago and suggested that we create this position, and that's where that came from. We do have our external auditor review our books, and that's Laporte, and for the last 10 years, they have not found any findings. We have compliance audits from both the state and the federal level that we meet. We have had the Louisiana Legislative Auditor in the school system look at our books, and we are also sought out by other school districts to ask for the procedures and policies that we have in place. So I just bring those up because I think it's important that you know that a lot of people look over our books in our school system, but we feel like we need some further assistance in that area. So we would like to go ahead and fill that position. We postponed filling it last year because we wanted input from our new board members. And we feel like now it's time to go ahead with that hiring position. It was in the budget last year, but like I say, we wanted input. It's in the budget now. The job has been advertised, and we're happy that this procedure is going along. There was one thing that we felt like needed to be changed in the job description, and that was the reports to. And after discussion with Mr. Foles, Ms. Richardson and I have met and talked, and I've spoken with the board officers, and we'd like to make a recommendation tonight that we change in the job description the report to line to the superintendent and board members. And with that, I'll ask Ms. Richardson if she has further comments she'd like to make.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. If I may build upon your comments, I'd like to also reciprocate what you said, Ms. Prevost. I have been on this board now 9 whopping months, and I applaud your work, and I sincerely mean that. The heart by which my comments are going to be stated tonight are simply to support the organization. Ms. Hines brought up the fact that we have a great track record with external auditors, and no, there has not been any findings of concern. In fact, we've been applauded for our performance, and these are things indeed to be commended for. With that said, I would like to just, if I may, provide just a little bit of information between the difference of an external auditor versus an internal one. And I'd also like to give to you a definition of an internal auditor, because it is to provide support to you, Ms. Prevost, as well as this entire organization. And I know that you know this. So with that said, an external auditor, their whole purpose is to literally seek out financial statement fraud. That's the ugly side of auditing, by the way. But an internal auditor is completely different. They, on the inside, and here's my most positive definition, that, or my definition, if I may, it just simply is this individual, their job is to take an internal look at anything within our organization. It could be a policy, a procedure, something we've done for years over years, anything that weakens our organization in keeping us from reaching our mission, our vision, and our goals. Now, that's a great thing. I think we can all agree to that. So here's the deal. This is a positive thing. It should be a positive thing, and I think that we can build upon already the great reputation that we have. I cannot go any further without also stating an extreme gratitude to you, Mr. Falls. And let me be very clear, because there's lots of discussion about this position. And what I valued so very much was the fact that in the audience we have Ms. Wade, who happens to be an internal auditor, who, Mr. Brome, I believe she could answer for you several of your concerns within the job description. This is what she does. This is her expertise. But she took the time to express some concerns to Mr. False regarding this job description. And this is what I respect about Mr. False, and I've stated this 1,000 times. He is immediate in his response. He also took the time to meet with her, to meet with myself. And I just applaud you for that. And then not only that, he put action behind that. And I just want you to understand, not every superintendent does that. We don't always get action. Sometimes we just get ears. But I just really appreciate the fact that we took the time to get action on this item. So with that said, as Ms. Hines has said, we really would like to have a report line. The internal auditor needs to report to both the superintendent and the board. What does this mean to my fellow board members? There is no really extra workload. It can be a monthly or a quarterly report. It's whatever you should so desire. In fact, I don't even think you have to technically see this individual. So it's whatever we deem as important to this board. As such, this individual should also actively participate in partnership with Mr. False, our superintendent, to hire this individual. So that being said, the most important thing is that report line, and I thank you, Ms. Hines, for the opportunity to speak on that.
Ms. Hines, would you like to make the motion?
So I will make the motion that we accept the change to the job description for internal auditor, and that change would be reports to superintendent and the school board.
Ms. Richardson,
And
would
I'd
you
like to second that, please.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any questions from the board? Who is it, Mr. Brown? Any questions from the board?
Are we going to the queue?
Any comment, Mr. Bro?
Yes.
You want-
I would like to comment that we, as a board, do not generally approve position descriptions. And that what we're doing here is only saying that we would like whatever position that is developed for this internal auditor be made that they reports to both the board and you, Mr. Fultz. So rather than go through the details of the entire PD and accepting that, I would like to.
That's not what the motion
And that's, I know what the motion is, and that's what I'm reaffirming, is that we're not really approving a PD. We're only approving the idea that the internal auditor will report to both the board and the superintendent.
Okay, let's stay on the motion. Mr. Nation?
Thank you, Mr. Kuzan. And I guess I'm going to take a different tact. I certainly appreciate the work that's gone into this, and certainly support the position. I think it's a worthy position. I do have a concern that this adding the board to the reports to line could cause some confusion. I would not want this to cause any confusion to any potential hire in because any internal auditor, at least in the business world, I mean, they're going to answer to the chief executive officer. They're going to report to the chief executive officer. And that person, and I know there was some confusion about this previously with certain members of the public, but what I think certain members of the public failed to realize is that other than Mr. Jabia, Mr. Kosei, Mrs. Prevost, and Mr. Bouillon, well, of course, Ms. Lemaine, this person would be the only person that would have direct access to the superintendent. So I mean, theoretically, everybody works for the superintendent, but not everybody can walk in the door and knock on the door. So again, in my world, you know, I mean, not everybody can walk in. I mean, but these folks can walk, if you understand what I mean. And again, so to me, that, to have that unfettered access to the superintendent, say, hey, time out, something's going on, we need to take a look at. I certainly appreciate adding to the board, and I mean, I get the intent, and I think it's well intentioned. I'm really, I would not want there to be any confusion. And if the board does, this committee, since we're acting as a committee, not as a board, but if this committee agrees to forward this to the full board, I would hope that there would be some very clear clarification that if any reporting to the board would be, it needs to be spelled out, I think, pretty clearly, and not left any ambiguity, because I wouldn't want, I would hate to see any person in this position, misinterpret this, and it's not fair for us. It would not be fair of us to approve this job description and put that person in a position and say, well, you told me I reported to the board, so I'm going to pick up the phone and call Mrs. Heinz without Mr. Foltz, without the superintendent knowing it. Or I'm going to call, Mr. Nation, and, because you said I report to the board, so you're the board, right? So that would be, with that said, I'm probably going to, recommend, at least I'm going to probably vote against adding and the board to it, but that's the least, unless you all persuade me otherwise. Thank you.
Mr. Betancourt?
Yeah, Mr. Nation just confused me. Thank you.
Mr. Diamond?
Thank you, Mr. Kuzan. I think when you were talking about the board, we're not talking about board members. We're talking about the board. And the board is when we convene as a group, not as individuals. So we're 15 board members, but we're one board. So whenever that person or that report is generated, which is going to be a public record anyhow, that record is available to Mr. Foltz and to the sitting board in its capacity. So, that's what I understand report to the board. And that means that is available to the board in its entirety. Now, it may be disseminated to each individual board member, but at the same time, it is the board that, when it convenes, and they can't just go run off and tattle to one board member and to another. And my understanding with Act 1 is that we hire and fire one person, and that's the superintendent of the schools. He is over everyone else in this school district. So that is the reason why they need to report back to him, because we don't have the authority to hire an individual other than the superintendent, in my opinion. I'm not an attorney. I did come from Beta Springs, but I'm close. And I did stay at a Holiday Inn one time.
Okay, Mrs. Hines?
Mr. Kuzan, if I made the mistake of saying board members, I would just say the board. So that's what I would like to
Make that correction?
make that correction in the motion.
Okay, thank you. We'll make that correction in a minute.
Ms. Richardson, you seconded that. Would you
Ms. Richardson?
concur with my
Change from board members to board.
from board members to the school board?
I was actually going to tell Mr. Durman I appreciated him expressing that, because that's exactly the interpretation. It's not individual board
Right.
members. It
And-
is
and I'm
the board
sorry
is
if
the
I
collective whole.
misspoke with that.
Okay. Do I have any more board members want to speak on it? Ms. Richardson, would you like to speak again?
Yeah, I just want to perhaps, Mr. Nation, are you referring to the Act One? Is that your concern?
Yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Durman, I agree with you. I'm not a lawyer either. That's why I am going to, I've already begun the process of trying to get an exact definition of Act One, because if you go to look into that legislation, it says to certificated personnel. But in layman terms, if I may, let me just kind of explain why this is so important. I've been researching this. I've talked to bankers. I've talked to CEOs of companies, including my own, by the way. And an internal auditor cannot report to the person or department that they actually run. You can't do that. And let me just take it all the way home, if I may. Louisiana legislation also says, I want to just spell this out. It's not state law. It does not apply to school districts. But what they do say is state agencies with a budget of $30 million or more, they shall, Mr. Debbie, I love how you always emphasize the word shall. They shall have an internal auditor. Now, we are a school district. I believe it is safe to say that if we have a $480 million budget, that if this is what the highest standard of the land says in the state of Louisiana, as well as, by the way, the International Internal Auditor Association, their regulations, they say the same thing. So what I'd like to see in the spirit of cooperation is this idea that St. Tammany Parish literally operate at the highest level of integrity. And I believe that we do that, we can do that, and we should do that. So as far as who this internal auditor reports to, the definition by the IIA, it literally uses this word, independent consultant. Let me say again, independent consultant. Their job is to simply find anything weak within this organization to help strengthen it so that we can reach our mission, our vision. And so you cannot have the internal auditor reporting to the person they're auditing. And this is not about financial fraud, but people, this is not just bookkeeping. This is about the entire organization. So this report line is absolutely important to this board because guess what? We are liable for everything that happens in this district. And my job, that by the way I absolutely love, is to support everything that we are doing. I have really grown to love this district because I have much to be proud of. And I want to set it up for success. I want to support the initiatives of Mr. False, as well as Ms. Prevost and her entire team, as well as every administrator. But we need an internal auditor to be in our system to help us become better than who we are today. So that being said, report line to the entire board, not individuals. Thank you.
Mr. Nation?
Thank you. Yeah, and I totally understood, Mrs. Hines, to your point, that I did understand that this was, you did clearly say to the board, the point I'm making is that's ambiguous and I think adds even further confusion. But I'm also, to Mr. Durman's point, I thought, I was beginning to think, well, maybe we're just talking about literal reporting. A literal report, which is what you're saying, rather than in terms of a supervisory capacity. I would disagree that the internal auditor would even if we left it as is, would, if the purpose of this is to audit the superintendent, I think our own external reports, auditors have said, I think we have a lot of checks and balances in place here. Our risk profile, and I think we discussed this earlier, our risk is in our schools with the cash, and that's where the focus needs to be. But having said that, if we're going to get in the details about this, you're correct, and Mrs. Richardson is correct, in terms of, and she brought something out, Mr. Broom reminded me of something, and it caused me to think of what Mr. Broom said. So how can an internal auditor, we're saying in this job description, initiates practices and procedures. Well, who's going to audit her or him? Because you can't write procedures and then audit your own procedures. that is the, and I do know a little bit about auditing myself. So you can't audit your own procedures. So that's a conflict right there. So anyway, thank you.
Richardson?
Let me answer that question, if I may. Who audits the internal auditor? Do you know what their very first job responsibility is? It's to write what's called a charter. A charter is basically the rules of engagement that, by the way, must be approved by this board. Okay? So it's whatever this board deems. What are the boundaries? What are the rules of engagement? We get to dictate that. We set that standard. But a charter is the very first step.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. Before I go to the public for comments, I know that Mr. Jabby did a lot of research on this matter. Mr. Jabby, would you like to comment on this? Would you like to? Yes, I would like to hear. I'd like to hear your comment.
I'll be happy to. I'm listening, and I really, really wonder, and I don't mean this negative or put anybody down, but I don't think that you understand what we are having an internal auditor do. You want to compare it to the National Association of Internal Auditors and a charter and what they do? That is not what we're doing here. Ms. Lemaine and I, over the past, I don't know, 2 years probably, have surveyed districts throughout this state, and of the districts that have an internal auditor, they report to the superintendent. They do not operate by a charter. This is completely different. An internal auditor for this school system, and the main responsibilities is going to be to work with the schools and their activity funds to make sure that they're doing everything correctly, so that when we have the full audit, we're going to be in compliance. We're going to be doing things correctly. As your human resource director that I've been for a number of years, I've never seen anybody report to the board other than the superintendent. And by my knowledge and my experience and what I know about board members and their duties and superintendents and their duties, that is not one of your duties. You're in a conflict when you have one person that's going to report to the superintendent and then also to the board. So are you going to evaluate this person? I don't think that's your duty. I don't think that's part of your responsibilities. This is not about transparency. This is not about integrity. Everything is in the clear. Your superintendent, you have the right to request from him any document or anything going on in this school system. That is a public record. What this is about, I really don't know, but it's not about transparency and it's not about integrity. I don't see how you can have a person that reports to the superintendent who you have charged with running this school system, and then also that person is going to report to you. Report to you. And you're going to evaluate that person? You can't do that. That's not your duties. I think I've made my point. I'm totally against this. Every school system that we surveyed that had an internal auditor, that person reported to the superintendent only, and in fact, one of them reported to the chief financial officer, because this person is here to help us with our internal controls. That's what they're there for our school activity funds. That's it, Mr. Kuzan.
Javier, we're going to go back to Ms. Richardson.
I owe it to this board to address what Mr. Jabbia has said. There's a reason that the internal auditor needs to report to two individuals. From an HR evaluative perspective, that's an HR matter that most certainly is done by our superintendent, Mr. Falls. Our job is just simply to receive reporting documents from this person, giving assurance and confidence to this board that we are operating above reproach. Secondly, I will say it again, an external auditor is not, their only job is to do financial statement evaluation. They do nothing else. An internal auditor looks at all systems, all controls to make sure we are operating at the highest level. And I will end with this last statement. The top 4 school boards in the state of Louisiana, they have an internal auditor that reports to both the school board and the superintendent. They include Calcasieu, East Baton Rouge, Jefferson, and I hope and pray I'm saying this right, Caddo, C-A-D-D-O. See, this is my Midwest coming out, sorry. That being said, I know what my intentions are. I also know that if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right, or we will not do it at all. And that is how strongly I feel about this. This is why I want a legal, affirmed definition from the state of Louisiana as to Act 1, so that we are 100% confident. But I do believe that this can be an extremely positive thing, and it should be. Ms. Hines has already said it's been on the budget last year and this year. It's not even just about what we want, or I want. This is about also what our constituents want. And I too will vote no, Mr. Nation, if we are not committed to doing this right. Because I will wait for my definition from the state of Louisiana until we get it right. But my job is to support this organization and do whatever it takes to strengthen it. And I believe that this is an instrumental role. And by the way, that really cool thing Mr. Foles said to me the other day, we all must operate at our highest level of excellence, meaning from the cook to the substitutes, to our financial team, to our HR team, to our education team, to every single bus driver, including this internal auditor. We must be doing our job in order for this district to be its very best. So this is not Wonder Woman coming in to save the day. This is someone coming in to serve a very specific role, and that is a simple phrase, simply as this: it's support. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. I'm gonna let Ms. Lemmy comment, and then we're gonna go we're gonna vote.
Awesome.
Okay.
I just want to thank you, Shelta, for doing the research and bringing this to, to teach us more about it. And I want to thank you, Mr. Jabbia, for sharing your perspective and the research that you have, because I very much want an internal auditor, and I very much think that it would be an asset. But I agree with much of what you said. I don't feel it's our responsibility to evaluate them or any of those things. However, I do know that I am held accountable for the budget and how it goes, and if more information I have about what's going on, like I did get the budget, but if I have an auditor giving me reports, I can at least educate myself to feel that I could somewhat be accountable. So that's just my mindset. So I just want to thank you while I still learn about it, but I appreciate both of your comments.
Okay. I'd like to have comments from the public right now. Oh, I'm sorry. Who is it? Mr. Dermott, I'm sorry.
I know you said you were going to cut it off from the board, but I got a question now. Listening to all of this, I mean, when you're saying that they oversee our policies and everything within, how in the world can somebody that's a CPA oversee instructional and curriculum and give an assessment and an opinion when they're an accountant, if that's what their job description calls for? You saying they got the ability to run overview the entire school district without any credentials. I mean, we're trying to hire an auditor that's financial auditor that's dealing with numbers, not dealing with policy and procedure and everything else that goes on within the school district. I'm missing what we're doing here. I don't know. Like Ron, I'm confused.
You finished, Mike? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna give you one more.
I'm just going to ask, I'm hoping that, yes, okay, she's indicated she's going to speak. This is a professional internal auditor, and I'm going to actually receive my comments, because I hope, Mr. Derman, you'll have clarification in just about 2 seconds from the professional herself.
I just want to say, let's keep your comments to what we're talking about, and also let's try to keep it in a time within the time perspective, please. Okay, state your name.
All right, I'm Marie Wade from Slidell.
Okay.
First of all, forgive me if my voice is cracking because I'm a little under the weather. First of all, to address Mr. Nation and Mr. Jabbia, as an internal auditor, we know who we report to. We are not confused. We make sure that that is stated and understood before we even get started. But second of all, I do want to thank Mr. Foltz and the board for not only posting the position, but making efforts toward making it happen, because actions speak louder than words. Your recognition that a publicly funded organization receiving almost $500 million in revenue from various sources needs reliable internal controls is commendable. But of more notable importance, as I mentioned earlier, is that there's action put behind the words. To address Mr. Derman, as an internal auditor, you're concerned with more than money. You are concerned with policy. You are concerned with operations. You are concerned with the simple things as, does everyone have a badge on? Because all that is part of risk management, which is what an internal auditor does. So it's more than money. We can't be one-sided into putting an internal auditor into that, particular department. Now, what I would like to see, that this is just the beginning, that an entire internal audit department is hired, because the task, even as limited as the job description that was originally given is a lot for one person to do. There are more than 55 properties. And then again, the internal auditor also has to audit the operations itself. So that is a lot for one person to do. But this new internal auditor will give confidence to our taxpayers that their hard-earned monies are not used in any backroom deals or cronyism. This internal auditor is the face of compliance, ethics, and transparency. So yes, it is about transparency, Mr. Javier. I and many other taxpayers look forward to this hiring because it signals the beginning of a true change within this organization. So once again, I thank you for renewing some confidence. If you all have any questions about what an internal auditor does, I'll be happy to answer them for you. I have been for 11 years now in the gaming industry, so I'm not only used to the consistent compliance, but the constant knock on the doors, this isn't right, let's fix it, let's talk about how to get it done. So it's not about going into HR and telling HR how to do their job. It's about making sure that HR does their job. It's not about going into, the finance part of it and telling the CPAs how to do what they do. It's making sure that they do what they do according to standards that have been set. So I thank you for listening to me. And once again, thank you all for bringing this to light.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think right now we're like, I think we got anyone else? Please state your name.
Lee Barrios. I'd like to address the Act One part again. I think some of you that are still on the board, that were on the board before, when Act One was being pushed, I think you understood what the real underlying purpose of that was, to take away some of the powers of the democratically elected school boards. You didn't like it, you resented it. As it ended up, it really, the only power it took away from you was the ability to hire and fire administrative positions, and teachers, I guess. But it didn't, and if you look at your responsibilities as school board members, you're responsible for all oversight. You're legally responsible for all oversight. So that's why you take votes. Once you vote, you're responsible for what you voted for. So when you approve the budget, you're then legally responsible for that budget. I think to make this personal is unfortunate. What if every teacher said, when it came evaluation time, and the principal or whoever was evaluating the teacher came in to do the observation, and the teachers took it personally. I mean, they're credentialed, they should be respected, they're doing their job, and yet there's oversight for them. And we all know also, this is not relevant to this administration or any other, but we all know it happens far too often statewide. New Orleans is a perfect example. Prior to Katrina, the corruption was terrible. Now we have, it seems like every week we've got a charter school, if not in New Orleans, elsewhere. And some in the state we don't even hear about that have whistleblowers or people reporting, and they're getting fired for. I know of a principal who's actually running for District Bessie 2, who was fired because she reported to her CEO that like $270,000 was missing, so she was fired. You need the proper procedures. I think it's important. It's important for you legally as a board to have that oversight. And the idea that whoever was hired by the superintendent would try to go behind his back, knowing that he's the only one that also could fire her and hire another one. I don't think that would happen. So I like the idea of reporting to the board also, and that this shouldn't be taken as anything personal, and it's your legal responsibility. You need to have an internal auditor. Thank you.
Okay. Board members, we have a motion on the floor to accept the proposed revision to the internal auditor's job description. Would you please, before we do, you have something?
I'd like to introduce a different motion, alternative motion.
Substitute motion, right?
Yeah, a substitute motion? Okay, Mr. Betancourt, we would like to introduce a substitute motion.
With all of this back and forth going on, somewhat confusing, I would like to offer a substitute motion that our Human Resources Department go back and come up with a better suited job description of exactly what we want our internal auditor to do in our school system. And it may have nothing to do with Internal Auditors United or Internal Charters United or whatever, but I think maybe that would clear up this problem. Let's have a job description. Mr. Broom called in question a few of these things in here. Let's have a job description that completely and exclusively fits what we want our internal auditor to do. And that's a long motion. That can be
All right.
shortened.
I just wrote to rewrite.
First of all, we would need a second to your motion. Okay.
No
Second by Mr. Derman.
Okay.
Okay, now, the first thing we need to do is to vote on the substitute motion, right?
Yeah.
We have a discussion on that. I'm just thinking we've already had a lot of discussion on this matter.
We have.
And I don't know if we had any more discussion left.
I don't want to confuse
huh?
anybody.
Ms. Lamy, I have a question.
Okay. Let's go to the board to discuss the substitute motion. Okay, Ms. Lamy?
My question is, if we're going to rewrite the description, do we first need to get the definition Shelta's waiting on to see whose responsibility it is to hire them? Because if the board is responsible for being part of the hiring process, then that means that we would have to be partially responsible for writing the job description. If it's not our responsibility, then we would be out of it. But I'd hate to do one way or the other and find out it's the opposite.
So, Mr. Betancourt, would you like to include that in your motion?
Yes.
Substitute motion?
Yes, let me bring Mr. Jabi into this. When y'all change something, a policy, a job description, you bring it to the board and we approve it, right, or disapprove it?
Yes, sir. All job descriptions are approved by the board, or any
Right.
changes to job descriptions
So
are
if
approved by
this
the board.
motion would have passed, they would do their job and present whatever the new job description is for our purview for us to look at.
Which makes
and then we would vote on it. And maybe that would clear up some of this stuff that we have going on with this prior discussion.
Any more discussion on the substitute motion? Mr. Derm? Mr. Bro, I'm sorry.
No, I pass.
You passed? Mr. Dermott?
Yeah, I mean, I was perfectly good with the original motion until we all started talking about it, and I don't understand how in the world anybody that's not an attorney, someone that isn't a certified or teacher, that has at least is capable of being the supervisor in our district and a CPA, possibly do some of the things we're talking about doing. I mean, we got a staff of lawyers looking at our policies. We have umpteen different supervisors, elementary, upper ed, middle ed, whatever, at every level in education. And what I'm reading the job description doesn't sound like what we're talking about them doing. And that's where I got a problem. I don't have a problem with having an internal auditor that's going to look at our school-based financing and report back to the superintendent on procedures and all of these kind of things. I don't have a problem whatsoever with doing that. But I don't know how you're going to hire one individual that's supposed to be God and look over every facet of what we do, over 7,000 employees. And we're talking about people with PhDs and everything else in education, and somebody and look, I'm not cutting down a CPA by any means, Ms. Prevost, or anybody else that's out there. But I mean, you're certified in your field, but inside your field, not in every field. And I just don't know how in the world that's what this job description is intending to do, and I don't think it is by any means. So I'm really confused, and I'm almost, again, with Mr. Betancourt, to send it back to the drawing board and drill down on exactly what we intend this internal auditor to do within our school district for our superintendent and our board. That, to me, is where we at with this. Sorry.
Let me first just start by stating some obvious facts. An internal auditor is not just a CPA. There's far more behind their credentials than just CPA. So if it was just a CPA, I would agree 100% with Mr. Derman's comments. Secondly, job description. It's a bit outdated. The only thing I was really interested in was the report line. And as I have also told Mr. False and Ms. Hines, I would rather hold off on any of this discussion until we get a legal definition of, first of all, Act 1. And then go from there and pull actual and educate this board on what an internal auditor is. Like I said, I really don't have a problem with the job description, a little outdated. But I'm all right with it. But we will do this right. So I'm 200% behind holding off, and I will wait to get my opinion from not only the Louisiana legislative auditor, but I'm awaiting my response from the AG at this point. And I will get a legal definition for this board so we understand fully our obligations and our responsibilities to this role, because I'm not really interested in some subjective item. I really want to do this right. So with that said, I will build upon a pause.
Ms. Hines?
I wanted to point out that in the job description, there is, it says at the bottom, the superintendent reserves the right to review, revise, update, and change the job and any and all duties due to the changes in job content, organizational structure, or state and federal laws, and that is in this job description. I do not see the board evaluating the internal auditor. I believe that is the job, Mr. Volz's job, but I do see reporting to adding the reporting as being a way for the internal auditor to independently report to the board. I also see this person working in collaboration with Ms. Prevost and her staff, and certainly Mr. Jabbia and Mr. Foles.
Mr. Nation?
Thank you, Mr. Kuzan. Yeah, in terms of the substitute motion, which is on the floor, I mean, I'm happy to support it, to send it back to maybe, as Mr. Derman said, to drill it down, because I think just the conversation we're having here tonight and the confusion that's been expressed by all of us, and frankly, not even the confusion by me because of what that I think we're setting up a very conflictual and adversarial situation, and potentially, and I think, and I don't think that's anybody's intention necessarily, but I think, even just what Mrs. Heinz just said, I mean, you've got a line. If I read this as just and we're all, average, everyday people, all of us up here, when it says reports to the superintendent board, that tells me the board is my supervisor. And then it says at the bottom what Mrs. Heinz just read, which I hadn't gotten to, says, but then it says, but then I'm confused as the internal auditor. But then it says the superintendent can change that. Well, wait a minute. You said I report to the board, so how can the superintendent change something that I report to the board to? So, either way, I mean, so if we're talking about reporting, as is all of our supervisors and everybody else reports to us on occasion, then that's one thing. But if we're talking about supervision, I think that's a different matter. That I don't think we're in the business of supervising anybody but the superintendent of the school system, and that's in our collective capacity, not as in our individual capacities as members. Thank you.
I would like to inject something here. As chairman of the committee, I can support the substitute motion because I would like to make sure that, number one, we get everything right. That's legally correct. That's in the best interest of this board. And I'm listening to my fellow board members, we have a lot of confusion up here as to what's this and what's that. So I can support the substitute motion because I feel that in the end, we would get it right, and that's what we need to do. Ms. Richardson?
I'll just, thank you, and I agree with you, Mr. Kuzan, that we will get it right. But in bold, to answer Mr. Nation, what's in bold, I'm going to read it. The superintendent reserves the right to review, revise, update, or change the job and/or, listen, duties. This only applies to duties, not the report line. Again, it's just task. What are the tasks? Our superintendent has the authority to alter the task, and that's important because we want him. They're supposed to work in collaboration, as Ms. Heinz just said. But like I said, not the report line.
Mr. Hersey?
I'd just like a little clarification on what we're fixing to vote on. Is this to table this matter until further time? Is it what we're voting on?
We're going to vote on the substitute motion.
The substitute motion is what I'm
Right.
requesting information on. What is it? To table this matter?
To rewrite, to
So
send it
we
back
have to
to
table the matter
our
to the
staff and to get everything right, put it like
I'm
that.
not our legal advice, but if you approve the substitute motion, that basically, in essence, tables it, but you don't have to table it to do this. That motion says that we're going to send this back for the job description to be rewritten and bring it back to the board.
That's what I want to be clear on. Thank
I
you.
think that's what it said. Is that right?
Is that what you wanted, Mr.
Yep.
Bencourt? Is that your intent? Thank you.
At this time, I'd like for us to vote on the substitute motion.
May I get a clarification? Oh, I'm sorry.
Can I say
Mr.
one
Foster.
thing?
Mr. Phelps?
And, I've been listening to this for, I guess, 30, 40 minutes. The way this is set up now is nothing but proposed disaster for this administration without more answers. There is no way, listening to what I listened to, that I can fill the wishes and the needs of this board, of what I've heard tonight. My ultimate goal is to be
supportive of every policy that this board passes. And what I'm hearing tonight, I don't even know which way to go. Now, I support Mrs. Richardson's request to let's get more legal opinions. I also would suggest that someone review my contract. And there, my contract is very clear what my role and responsibilities are to this school system that this board has voted on. Now, if you change the contract, certainly that's a different thing. But right now, I think part of the Act 1 review, part of the legal review, part of my contract review needs to be done. I think we all have the same common goal to do what's best for this school system. I want to be very, very clear that this administration, this superintendent has absolutely zero to hide. Zero. And Ms. Wade and I have had great conversations, but honestly, I believe this administration, this board, this superintendent is the face of this school system. I honestly believe that this public supports this school system as evidenced by the 65% passage rate of a millage that we just passed. I know I totally believe in Terry Prevost and everything that she stands for each and every day. So I think we're all on the same page, but I think if we're going to get where we need to be, our theme this year is leading the way. If we're going to lead the way, let's do it right. There is definitely some conflict. The job descriptions that Pete has show in those systems reporting to the superintendent. If they've been updated, we need to know that as well. That would be a good opportunity to do that. I think if we go haste and we make mistakes, if we slow down a little bit, let's get it right. I mean, we have too many good minds and too many good people working with us to do it right, and that's where I want to be. And I would ask that you support Mr. Betancourt's motion to give us some time to get it right. We bring it back to you right. It's in a document that we can all believe in, that we can all support in, and there's nothing stronger than this team, St. Tammany. And that's how we've worked in the past. That's how I believe we should work. And if I'm going to stay superintendent, that's how I want to work. So that would be my suggestion and my only comments.
Thank you, Mr. Folk. So at this time, would you please vote on the substitute motion?
Do we need to have public comment before we do?
You do.
Again? What's that? I'm sorry. On the substitute motion, do we have any public comments on the substitute motion? Would you come up, please?
I'm from Slidell, Louisiana. While y'all were arguing, I did a Google research of what an internal auditor is. I suggest maybe some other people do. I understand, Mr. Falsh, you are the face of the school board. Well, I kind of, I do consider.
I didn't say I was the face.
Okay, let me rephrase to say what I want to say then. I do consider you the face of the school board. Sometimes the school board as a whole, we don't see y'all as often as we see Mr. False. I think we should have an internal auditor. I'm saying this as a taxpayer, not as an advocate or anything else. When we have board members making comments about what an internal auditor is and using the phrases that should not be used, I just want to make a point. I'm a nobody. I have less education than probably everybody on this board. But I am a self-advocate, and I'm going to get emotional because I really didn't like your commentary, sir. An internal auditor it helps an organization accomplish its objectives by bringing systematic, disciplined approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of risk management, control, and governance process. In simplest terms, the duties of an internal auditor are to objectively review an organization's business processes. That's a Google search. It's the law. We should have an internal auditor, and if there is nothing to hide, then there shouldn't be a problem with an internal auditor. That's all I have to say.
And just for clarification, this superintendent was the one that made the recommendation to put it in the budget to have internal auditor.
Yes, sir, I am aware of that.
And let's keep our comments on the substitute motion, please.
In defense of myself, when it comes to that, I don't have a problem with auditing our business operation, but the way it has been
Let's just clear it up.
interpreted.
Let's clear it up so we're all
Yeah.
on the same page.
I don't think anybody ought to be overseeing our curriculum and everything else. That's not part of our business operation. But this says they can, and I'm not, at least that's the way it's been implied, and I'm not in favor of that.
Okay. So right now, I'd like to vote on the substitute motion, please. Passes unanimous, so we'll send it back to committee. And
Thank
we'll
you. Thank you, board
review it.
members. Appreciate it.
Okay. Hold up, we're not ready.
Thank you, Mr.
Hold up.
Technical.
We're moving to item 5, early childhood updates. Ms. Gardner.
Talk about a transition there. Let me see
Right?
you pull this off.
Good evening, Mr. Phillips, Mr. Kuzan, and board members. I am here today to provide you with an update on how we're leading the way here in St. Tammany with pre-K. As you can see, our pre-K scores continue to grow in class each year. Classroom assessment scoring system is an observational instrument used to assess classroom quality. During the class observation, observers are scoring 3 primary domains: emotional support, classroom organization, and instructional support. Scores range from low to high, 1.0 being the lowest and 7.0 being the highest. Right now, we are anxiously awaiting our scores. However, the preliminary scores are projecting our district scoring a 6.0, moving us from highly proficient to excellent this school year. We are also projected to have 12 excellent school sites, which is an increase from last year's 9 excellent school sites and 4 the year before that. For the 1920 school year, the network is projected to be 5.5 highly proficient, also an increase from 5.48 the previous year, which means if projections are accurate, our network will lead the state with the highest class scores compared to networks of its size. In our network, we now have 23 public schools, 39 child care centers, and 4 Head Starts. All Type 3 centers, which are programs that accept public funding, mostly in the form of child care assistance, are part of our network. All of you have a flyer with the centers in our network. As a lead agency, we ensure class observations are conducted twice a year for infant, toddlers, and pre-K classrooms that are publicly funded programs and that teachers receive immediate feedback. We currently have 558 visits scheduled this year. A single online application system is used by families when applying for high-quality early childhood programs. Families are able to choose their top 3 choices when applying, with choices being their local public school, child care centers, or Head Start. As of today, in our public schools, we are servicing 1,306 total children in our pre-K program. This number includes all funded students, students with IEPs, and tuition-paying students. All qualifying students are placed in high-quality pre-K classrooms, and the remaining spots are offered to tuition-paying families. The September Powerup Challenge is for children to complete the sentence, "I am a future blank." When reading this, I immediately thought of the quote, "We cannot always build the future for our youth, but we can build our youth for the future." Each student will have a different end to that statement. However, each of them will be able to say, "I am the future." So with that in mind, please enjoy the video of our pre-K students as they begin their journey toward their future. That concludes my presentation. If anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Comments?
Ms. Gardner, right here at District 7. I would like, early education is very near and dear to my heart. I oversee 3 child development centers. One of them, by the way, is a partner with St. Tammany Parish school system, and we were actually part of your pilot program. I would like to inform the board what it means to get this class ranking that she's discussing. This class score is so important because it does measure the interactions between the student and the child. We want them to be meaningful. We want it to promote learning. What we're trying to do is create lifelong learners, children that are not afraid to learn in an environment that is safe and conducive for learning. So to be projected to score 6, that's exceptional, and I applaud you for this. I know what it takes to pass that class test, to be reliable. It's intense, and it's a lot of pressure on the teachers. So I'm just very proud to hear of this accomplishment. And then I would just like to share with you on a professional note that my director personally benefits from this district, this particular network, and other parishes have something of the like. But I assure you, it's not at this level. And so, again, just extremely proud of what the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Mr. Braun?
Yeah, I just want to say very impressive. These are tremendous numbers, and I appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
I think Ms. Richardson answered some of the questions. It's some kind of testing. I just wanted to get a little bit more background on how the evaluation, how are you achieving these numbers? I don't need details, but who does the evaluation? Is it state or
Yes.
federal or, okay.
So the district does 2 class observations in every pre-K classroom with district personnel, but those people observing the classrooms have to pass a reliability test, which Ms. Richardson was talking about, and it's very difficult. And then each classroom will have a state visit where someone from the state comes in and does the same observation on that classroom.
Well, thank you, and congratulations on the tremendous numbers.
Thank you.
Mr. Beckencourt?
Ms. Gardner, thank you for that update. It was uplifting, and I don't want an internal auditor changing anything that you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzan. I have a quick comment and a question. My comment is this program is critical for low-income families to get their parents to work. Not all of them can afford daycare. It also sets these kids up on a path to success. It gives them ABCs where they would normally just, be staring at video games or something. So it's critical, and it's very commendable. And my question related to that is, have we expanded this program to every elementary school now, or how close are we getting to being able to facilitate and distribute this program to every family, I guess?
We have 23 elementary schools participating in it. So I think we have a total of 27, so majority of them have pre-K programs.
Is this based on Title
I
I
think that's
funding?
right. No, some funds come from LA4 from the state. The district supplements the funds as well. So it's grants written by the state, and then the district supplements.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
With no other?
We do, let me tell you, Mr. Kuzan, we do have 2 classrooms that are funded by Title I. Out of all of our classrooms, 2 are funded by Title I. Just
Okay.
so you know that, sorry.
Mr.
I want to
Kuzan.
correct myself.
Ms. Gardner, I'd like to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Mr.
That was very
Kuzan,
well.
I'd like to ask her a question if we could.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Derman?
Yes, sir.
Looking at the number of students that we are actually supplying, I mean, we're close to what? Is it 934 inclusive in the 1306, or is it?
So you have 934 students that are funded through LA4.
Right.
Then you have 99 students that are funded through 8G and Title I. That's just a different budget. You have a
Okay.
total of 1306 in the district.
Okay, so we got 1306, and I think it was alluding to what Mr. Green was talking about not, most of this is dedicated to low-income students that qualify for this program, as opposed to all of our children. So,
That is
you know, whether regardless of income level or whatever. So would we say we're at 40%, 50%, 10%? Where are we as far as being able to provide every child in St. Tammany Parish at this age level these opportunities?
Well, I don't have the answer to that, because I would have to know how many 4-year-olds we have in St. Tammany that
Right.
would
Mr.
need to be
Derman,
in
based on
school.
the enrollment at each grade level, I would guess that that's probably at about 60% or a little
Oh.
bit better.
So we have increased over the last number of years. Because it
absolutely.
used to be maybe 30, in the 30s, and it went to the 40s, and now we're almost up to 60%, which.
Oh, okay, I got what you're saying now.
You understand
Okay.
what I'm
Yes,
trying, I'm trying to
yes.
see how we're growing it, but
Yeah.
I'm telling you, if it makes this
Yes.
big of an impact on our most needed children, it can also make an impact on our children that are more advanced, I guess, if you want to say, from educational standpoint. So it stays with them throughout their learning career. It isn't just when they hit kindergarten or first grade.
Right.
So, I mean, this is something that can help build all of our students and our district. So this is the best money we can spend, is in early childhood. So every penny we get extra, that's where it needs to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
No further comments? With no further comments,
Thank you, Ken.
this meeting is adjourned.